Picture this. You're wandering through Mesmer's castle when a small indent in a wall takes you by surprise. A ladder presents itself, so you climb down. You skirt along the edge of a forgotten catwalk into a room hidden behind a waterfall. The room has a painting and is full of junk. Naturally, you roll around, destroying it all before revealing a hidden wall. You pass through and climb into a casket before falling. You arrive on a hidden-away plateau, cluttered with abandoned furnace golems. Passing through them, you descend yet again before you see it, a door to a catacomb. You figure, why not? You've come all this way. Might as well clear the dungeon at the end. Oh, buddy, you have no idea. You clear through the dark-light catacombs, descending further, and further again. After dealing with the comically large big-mouth imp, you descend even further below. The catacomb ends in a boss battle with the Elder Inquisitor Jory. However, what usually would have been the little boss fight at the end of the dungeon now leaves you in a hanging, haunting abyss. As the excitement of the fight winds down, a deep feeling of dread sets in. Through a series of misfortunes, you've wandered into the Abyssal Woods. I love video games. I love music, and I'm sure you do too, which is why I welcome you to the first installment of a little series I'm calling Song to Story, where I intend to unearth the hidden stories told through video game music. To give you a quick breakdown of how this will go, I will first summarize the story of the character in question, and then dissect their respective theme piece by piece before putting everything together in the end. I will also use clips, with permission, from more technically advanced YouTubers such as Davivas to help explain things like chord progression and musical intention through the eyes of an expert, and all credit will be given appropriately. So, without further ado, I present to you the debut episode of Song to Story, starting with my favorite Elden Ring boss, the one and only, you know him, you love him, the Lord of Frenzied Flame, Midra. One quick intermission. I want to preface all this by saying that this is my interpretation on the song and story. Music is highly subjective by nature, and you might not agree with me on some things, and that's great. Feel free to give me your own perspective in the comments. Once residing in a beautiful, sun-bathed forest in the land of shadow, Sage Midra was hailed as a knowledgeable and empathetic man. Residing in his communal manse, Midra's personal drive for knowledge led to him collecting countless tomes and records, converting the halls of his cathedral into an effective library of sorts to preserve his accumulated wisdom. He was revered, loved by his followers, and a stable ally to the Horn Scent, a collective of spirit-worshipping individuals. In fact, Midra was a sanctioned minister of the Horn Scent, and the word manse itself is often referred to as, quote, an abode provided to a minister of Christian churches, specifically those under the Scottish Presbyterian Church. Together, they would peacefully coexist, a clad of brothers and sisters under the wise Sage Midra. Or, that was until the introduction of Nanaya. At first, Nanaya seemed like everyone else, longing for knowledge and security within the hands of the wise sage. And yet, Midra and Nanaya took a liking to each other, and soon became married. The manse entered a new era, one of kinship and love, further reinforced with the coming of their first child. But the outer gods would not have this, and Midra's child passed early into their life, sparking a harsh descent into the sage and his partner. Unbeknownst to them, Midra had been chosen by the Frenzied Flame, and it was now hell-bent on wearing Midra down into the would-be lord of the same name. While the loss of Midra's child hit the community, they were scheduled to recover, as who wouldn't manage to endure while under the light of Sage Midra. Time passed. The woods that sheltered Midra's manse took a new air about them. Strange insects began to arrive in the woods, the winter lanternfly. Unbeknownst to Midra, they were heralds of the frenzied flame, a bad omen appearing wherever the next frenzied outbreak was sure to commence. Side note, I think the name of this bug is really cool. It's known that the winter lanternfly will move into foreign areas almost invasively, which is funny considering they share part of their name with the spotted lanternfly, an invasive insect that is new to my home of the eastern United States. I thought it was an interesting comparison, since they're both invasive insects, but probably just a coincidence. Anyways, the winter lanternflies are said to herald the coming of the aging untouchable, a dreadful omen of the frenzied flame. These omens do not fall on deaf ears, however, as the horn scent, Midra's closest allies vehemently hate the frenzied flame, as it is known to them that the frenzied flame is the only power that can permanently erase spirits from existence, washing them away like dirt on a sidewalk. And so, with the omens of the frenzied flame, the horn scent marked the woods forbidden, and sent ruthless inquisitors to destroy the Mats and the frenzied influence for good. Without a second thought, the horn-scent inquisitors slaughtered their brothers in flesh to protect their brothers in spirit. Midra now more akin to the Antichrist than a saint. The attack left the scholars of the Mats confused and helpless, as they cry out in question as their brothers slaughter them. I beg you, stop. Haven't I taken enough? Are we not brethren, common on our line? And yet, you offer only cruelty. I ask, what crime did great Midra commit? This line is from one of the spirits of Midra's followers. It encapsulates Midra's innocence despite the ongoing crisis. We know that Midra did not will the frenzied flame into his woods, and yet the horn scent persecute. They destroy Midra's library, ruining his life's work and stamping out his collection of knowledge. They work their way through the Mats, slaughtering and destroying until they finally reach Midra and Nanaya. They capture him, easily, as he's simply an academic, no match for the brutish inquisitors of the horn scent. As they take Midra away, Nanaya's final words to him are simply, endure. Endure. A curse upon Midra's mind for the unknowable amount of time to come. But who is Nanaya anyways? She holds so much narrative presence even though she's barely mentioned outside of a painting of the couple. Hey, editing Z-Feed here. I was looking for pictures of that painting on Google, and apparently Nanaya's eyes aren't closed like I thought they were. They're open, and oh my fucking god, it's so unnerving. What the fuck? How have I never noticed? It's like, Jesus Christ. And a frightening detail, if you pull the image back, it's like she's looking directly at Midra, too. Like, almost with this hateful kind of glare. Like, she looks fucking insane. And if I had only wrote this into the script, I might have had some more in-depth thoughts on it. Because there's probably some kind of implication there, you know, why she's looking at him like that. But hey, for now, you're just going to get stuck with the spark notes, so sorry about that. Anyways, back to the video. Not much is truly known about Nanaya. The most direct interaction a player gets with her is discovering her corpse hidden high above the Mats, cradling an item, Nanaya's torch, which description reads, quote, a torch made by attaching a dying flame of frenzy to a small spinal column, and its unique skill is named Feeble Lord's Frenzied Flame. What the hell even is this item? Well, there are a few theories, but this is the one I personally subscribe to. By the way, you should subscribe. Anyways, I personally think that Nanaya is a herald of the Frenzied Flame herself, and that this, quote, dying Frenzied Flame, unquote, is one from a far-off land, one that she arrived to personally give new life to spread. I didn't pull this out of my ass, though, because it says in the description of Nanaya's torch that, quote, in a distant land in an age long past was born a man who failed to become the Lord of Frenzied Flame. All that remains of him is gently cradled by Nanaya. I personally believe to interpret this as the flame instead of the spine because the spinal column is that of her past child, perhaps the intended prodigy of this new Frenzied Flame. This belief falls into accord with the story as we know it, as Nanaya seduced Midra into having a child with her. This makes sense when we consider the godlike temptation that is synonymous with the frenzied flame, which we've seen in stories like Shabriri's. If Nanaya were an inhibitor of this flame, it would make sense why not only she was able to seduce a man so devoted to his academics, but also why the stark downfall of the manse occurred shortly after her arrival. Regardless, the Hornsent make their way to Midra, rip Nanaya from his clutches, and clear his debate hall, fashioning it into his personal hell. The Inquisitors produce a torture device, resembling some hellish golden rib cage, and allow it to work itself into Midra's body. The tendrils wind and pierce, snaking their way between bones, separating muscle fibers, tendons, and skin, but never lethally injuring Midra. The device was fashioned to strictly keep the victim alive for as long as possible while causing them as much pain as possible. This can also be seen on Midra's back, where his skin separates. You can see these golden stitches, a subtle nod to the fact that the device is yet keeping him alive, just so it can cause more pain. The game tells us that it was, quote, used by the Hornsent in the execution of a damnation like no other, unquote. Once the device properly crucified Midra, the Hornsent simply guard him while laying waste to his manse. They let him suffer and rot at the hands of their device. They burn his legacy away while his wails are heard echoing through the halls of his once golden library, now sunken and spurned by even the sun itself. This is the state we find Midra in. The once sun-kissed woods, now deep below the rest of the map, covered in a dense fog and bereft of light, now renamed to the Abyssal Woods. The aging untouchables wander the forest, nurturing more frenzied grapes for their master, the soon-to-be Lord of Frenzied Flame. The rats and goats around the area are all driven mad with frenzy, and the same winter lanternflies we discussed earlier, the warning signs of the frenzied flame, can be found scattered throughout the woods. Not even Torrent accompanies us on this journey, the game telling us that, quote, the spectral steed is frightened and cannot be summoned, unquote. Interestingly, we've never seen Torrent shy away from anything in the lands between, even in the few instances we encounter the frenzied flame. If you'll remember, earlier I talked about the frenzied flame washing spirits away like dirt on a sidewalk. Well, Torrent himself is a spirit. He can never truly die and manifests and disappears as we command. Knowing this, we can surmise that this frenzied flame is nothing compared to what we would have encountered in the lands between. This shit is for real, and Torrent wants none of it. Moving forward, we push through droves of Hornsent Inquisitors and narrowly avoid aging untouchables. Finally, we reach the manse, and upon entering, we hear Midra himself speak out to us, warning us to turn back from this accursed place and save ourselves.
Leave. Now. Come no closer. No closer, I say. The madness was.
Man, this dude is in the middle of eternal damnation, and the first thing on his mind when we enter his house is whether or not we get out alive. Midra deserved better, bro. Of course, we press forward. Through a painting depicting the manse in its glory days, we pass through an invisible wall, immediately juxtaposing the beautiful painting we just saw fade before our eyes. We are faced with a long hallway, drowning in flame, burned books littering the floor. We see Midra's life's work, or what's left of it. Destroyed books and scrolls litter the ground, piling up the walls and obscuring everything. Hornsent Inquisitors march and patrol amidst the dead, ensuring the erasure of Sage Midra is final. Working our way through the Hornsent, we encounter the souls of Midra's followers, as mentioned before, pleading for mercy and questioning why their brothers turned on them, for the Hornsent could see what they could not. Making our way through the banquet halls and expansive libraries, we reach a grand painting of Midra and his wife, Nanaya. Upon closer inspection, we can see that in the painting, Nanaya is pregnant with Midra's child. This is perhaps the last time the couple was content before the hellacious downfall of the sage, as the catalyst for this despair was the loss of their child. Through this painting, which is another invisible wall, we are led to a rather unassuming corner room with a series of large sheets covering something. Upon closer inspection through out-of-game tools, we can see that under these sheets are various iterations of the three fingers, the manifestation of the frenzied flame. Notably, the three fingers that we encounter in the lands between are sealed away far beneath the capital city Lanedale, below the mass grave of the Merchants Guild. If you'll recall, the merchants were, to put it briefly, buried alive in a mass grave on false heretical accusations by none other than Shabriri, the most prominent NPC when it comes to the frenzied flame. His story isn't really that important to this one, but basically just see him as a beta version of Midra, someone plagued with madness and a herald of the frenzied flame. As stated earlier, at the end of the merchant's grave dungeon we find the three fingers, which, if we followed Hayeda's questline, will imbue us with the frenzied flame, allowing us to get the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending of the game. That was a lot just to say that the fact that the three fingers are in Midra's manse says a lot about madness and the Outer God's influence. So yeah, the three fingers are basically the icon of the frenzied flame, much how the two fingers are the icon of the Golden Order. Seeing a few of these effigies, for lack of a better word, stuffed in this closet and abandoned show some pretty damning evidence of malpractice. My personal theory is that Nanaya has something to do with this. Maybe crafting these and sending them up somewhere would increase the frenzied flame's influence over the area. Passing through, we enter a series of revolving libraries and more horn-sent inquisitors. Then, atop the bookcases, alone, is Nanaya's corpse, cradling the aforementioned Nanaya's torch, which we discussed earlier. It is then that we are confronted with more tortured wailing coming from a nearby room. Passing through the last of the Inquisitors, we finally reach the opulent and holy Sage Midra, small, frail, and decomposing on the floor. Entrenched in his skeletal frame is the golden pillory, splitting his skull, piercing his ribs, and keeping his withered body propped up. As soon as we enter, he hits us with the iconic, "The depths of your foolishness!" and proceeds to flail around like a freak until we cave his shit in. The cutscene that follows tells us a lot about the state of Midra, so I'll let that play now.
Enough. I have endured more than enough. I ask you forgive me, dearest Nanaya.
Notice how different Midra sounds in the cutscene from when he sounded when he first greeted us. He sounds like he's completely given up.
I have endured more than enough. No closer, I say. The madness was. I ask you forgive me, dearest Nanaya.
He sounds tired, and we can hear him apologize to Nanaya, saying, I have endured more than enough. Which, if you'll remember, is a callback to her last words, or word, to him, which was simply endure. He then proceeds to impale his hand on the pillory and rip his own head off, which would explain why he endured the torture if this was the ultimatum. But it seems after an undisclosed amount of torture, losing his entire life's work and his wife and his child, the thing to push him over the edge and embrace the frenzied flame was us, a lowly tarnished who went against his wishes, invaded his home, and kicked the shit out of him. This lifetime of such high highs and such low lows has worn down on Midra, especially since he's had God knows how long to sit in this room and reflect amidst the torture. Either way, the thing that stands before us now is something otherworldly, straight out of Bloodborne, and Shabriri's wettish dream, Midra, the Lord of Frenzied Flame. I want to note a couple things about this boss fight before we get into the music. Firstly, the iconography of headlessness when it comes to the Frenzied Flame. In the chosen ending of the game where you become the Lord of Frenzied Flame, the player character also loses their head. I think it's a neat choice due to the fact that you are literally losing your head, losing your cognition, your reasoning, embracing madness, throwing emotion to the wind to wash the world away in a total reset, taking the good and the bad and melting it down into a primordial soup until there is nothing left. It's also important to know that the madness spells in-game come from the eyes, and eyes in general have a lot to do with the history of the Frenzied Flame. See Shabriri Grapes and the Aging Untouchable for that. It makes sense if you think about the nihilistic determination to end all things in the Frenzied Flame. If everything must die, why do you need eyes? What is so important to see anyways? Nothing. It will all burn away with the Frenzied Flame and chaos will take the world. It's also cool to think of the importance of eyes when it comes to human connection, the eyes being the window to the soul and all that, but also extremely important for conveying emotion, which those who are truly mad have no regard for. Basically, the goal of the Frenzied Flame is to wipe everything away and provide the world with a fresh start. And the way that is represented by how madness is depicted in Elden Ring is pretty smart. By removing the heads of those who follow madness, we are told that they literally lost their minds. And through madness sprouting from the eyes, it shows a fundamental human corruption that originates from the Frenzied Flame, which is very in line with the theming of the affliction, but I digress. This is all to say that the way Midra fights perfectly reflects this uncaring, unflinching force of gleeful ruin. He doesn't even bother to dodge. He glides around with a newfound grace and freedom. He even poses the fuck up whenever he skewers you like a fish. This thing is having the time of its life in this fight. But Midra, the man, still exists within the Lord. He isn't erratic, he's controlled. Midra, the calculated and intelligent mind, still exists within the Lord, albeit probably on the high of his generation. But in this controlled execution, Midra is unique. Midra, despite everything telling us otherwise, is still in control. He hasn't lost his head. Compared to everything else that has been happening, everything that has been out of his hands, the death of his child, the horn-scent betrayal, his immeasurable physical pain, he is finally in control. And nothing better represents his story, his descent, than his boss theme. I'm gonna preface this part by saying that I am not a music theorist. I'm just a guy who loves this game and loves its music, so I apologize if I get some things wrong on the technical side. I will also say that I'm going to overanalyze the hell out of this and reach pretty far in some cases, so bear with me. Regardless, I think it's about damn time we talk about Midra's boss theme, the Lord of Frenzied Flame. The track opens with a choir, which brings with it the motif of holiness in a church-like setting, which is on theme for Midra, as we know him to be a priestly figure. The choir rises and ends on a solemn male voice, which I perceive as Midra himself, quite literally being the last one remaining in his manse as his brethren were slaughtered around him. His voice is then cut off by a graining, wrenching screech of some string instrument, almost as if the musician is torturing their violin, which can be interpreted as Midra himself being infected by this madness alone. That droning whine is followed by a seriously deep solo vocalist, which represents the horn scent. It exists before the rest of the melody, as they do before Midra comes along with the cello solo. The cello is a very important instrument as it's often referenced as the most human-sounding instrument. A solo performance also draws focus onto one aspect of the song, one aspect of the story. It's very personal and oftentimes somber in nature, thus it fits as a stand-in for Midra. It's important to mention as well that the time signature switches between a 3 and 5 beat measure. A 3 beat measure is commonplace in the Souls series, and traditionally used as a more intimate time signature, historically used in waltzes and ballroom music. However, pairing this with the 5 beat measure on its own is incredibly off-putting and unnatural, but switching between time signatures sells the madness of this track. The cello is then duetted with a violin, Nanaya. The two trail up and down while the horn scents still bellow underneath them. All the while this ominous gong pounds in the background, forcing our attention before we fall back to Nanaya and Midra. Davivosk puts it well in his video on the track, noting that similar percussion instruments such as bells were used in previous Souls games as an omen of death.
Right? In Dark Souls 3 they have bells as some sort of announcer of death. It almost reminds me of that in here. I wonder if that's the kind of vibe they're going for, like a harbinger of death or something. But at the same time, it feels so tragic, man, this melody.
This description fits, as we know of the downfall the couple will soon suffer through, the looming gong reminding us of the tragedy soon to come. This hanging bridge is very ominous, and I think this is noting of the double life Nanaya lives. We see a violin section, which has already represented her, as well as feminine choir voices. The harmony is very eerie and tense. Perhaps it's pointing at her preparations for the frenzied flame. Remember the finger sculptures. Perhaps it also is pointing at the tragedy of their late child. Whichever it is, it marks the end of the days of the manse bathed in gold, because from here on, the track takes a dive into hell. Some would say the cello returning symbolizes Midra's new form in the boss fight, as a lumbering, overshadowing thing that takes up space in the track, but I don't think we're there yet. No, I think this foreboding cello represents the masses of the horn scent descending upon Midra's manse in their mutiny. We do see plenty of hulking horn scent warriors that would fit this bill in the manse, so I think it checks out. The baritone choirs also scream out once again, interpreted as Midra's loyal followers crying out to their brothers as they are slain, as the troops march through the manse, destroying it all. It's also cool to note the almost 80s slasher vibes of the quick attack notes from the high-pitched violins, giving a sense of danger and suspense in the back of it all. The segment hangs on this choir as well, and this is where the story gets back to Midra. The return of the bass singers bring us back to the horn scent, which now have cornered Midra in his debate hall. They scold him and loom over the track with their overwhelming presence, the track sounding genuinely intimidating here to back this up. The attack notes of the strings quicken, almost as if Midra's heartbeat starts to skyrocket as the horn scent produce their torture device, his pillory, his hell. The trailing violin almost sounds like Nanaya being dragged away from him, barely squeaking out a few words while being wrenched away from her husband. The full choir joins in as well, as if all the forces in this tale are screaming out for Midra in unison, for one way or another. With the crash of sound, the pillory is plunged into his skull. It worms its way through his body with a white-hot pain as his muscle fibers separate from tendons, separate from bone, separate from ligaments, as he is torn apart from the inside, but just barely enough so that he remains alive. The followers' choir cry out in a descending pattern, literally depicting Midra's descent, his downward spiral into hellish madness. The feminine choir hangs above it all, singing the main melody. Whether or not you interpret this as Nanaya's influence over everything with the frenzied flame, or a more endearing option with her word, endure, topping all the pain Midra is experiencing, she is quite literally the melody, the face of Midra's torture.
Let me show you guys this harmony. Check this out. Insane harmony. Man, the harmony, like half the chords in the harmony don't even belong to the key. Like they're wrong chords, so to speak, that the composer is putting in there to accentuate certain very, very specific emotions. Like he starts here with the sad chord, he goes here. This is I'm gonna call this an unexpected sad chord. Is a chord in this key here that was not supposed to be here. It was not supposed to be a sad chord, so he reinforces this feeling of something ominous, something tragic and disturbing happening. Then he does, and then he goes to this unexpected tense chord. Look at the imposing, like nature, like intimidating nature of this chord. This chord is a tense chord. Like I said, it builds tension, but it also happens to be a happy chord. So there's a majesty to it. There's a sense of glory in it. And then from here he goes straight to a very, very disturbing chord. So, man.
With one more wrenching squeal of the strings, the thumping bass cuts away from Midra, almost like the horn scent returning to patrol and defacing the mats after the pillory tore its way through Midra. With that, we end the first phase, and the second truly marks Midra's entry into glorious madness.
This is not the kind of song that I was expecting at all. Like I said at the beginning, I thought this was going to be like an insane beast, bloodborne, like chaotic kind of song. There's a very well-defined character, a lucid kind of, I don't know, I have a feeling of a person from this, of a person with a character, with a personality.
This opener is what I think marks the true transformation of Midra into the Lord of Frenzied Flame. The yawning, gaping sound followed by a crashing bass drum and the escalating, screeching strings. It all signifies the takeover of madness in this cacophony of sound. The bass drum, as we'll come to find, is rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat throughout the entire second phase, which offers a juxtaposition for the fact that Midra has become the embodiment of true death, washing away life in body and spirit with the frenzied flame. This beginning section embodies Midra's movements, as the sway of the brass and vocals conveys a lumbering, lanky figure, while the underlying strings, fast and frantic, can possibly portray us, the Tarnished. It gives the feeling of something insignificant and small up against an impossible, towering force, accentuated by the power of the bass. This can be seen in other tracks like Godric's theme as well. The track falls to a more subdued portion, highlighted again by the feminine vocals, think Nanaya. The horns and strings, still frantic, and now outright dangerous in their performance, all capped by the infamous Merchants Guild motif. A quick look into the meaning of this melody. It has to do with the Merchants Guild, obviously, which we talked about before. Long story short, the song was written by one Saint Trina for the merchants to play to forget about the loss of their people, to connect with one another in the face of madness. The inclusion of that motif in this track highlights the obvious connection of madness between the two groups, and the contortion of the last note signifies a change in tone. While the merchants play their somber track in the face of madness, Midra is madness. And thus that track is more shrill and on edge, losing its comforting nature and adding a tasteful and sinister edge to the motif. The main melody of this track is really brilliant. Technically speaking, I don't think I can add too much commentary other than it's just a really damn good song. But story-wise, if we're following my interpretation so far, I think it says a lot. This portion of the track is led by the baritone choir, or Midra's followers as we know them. The fact that they sing the main melody for the entire track leads me to believe that they are literally singing Midra's praises and woes. They are, in unison, crying out for their leader, for his heroism and tragedy, for a loved and valued member of their community. It does the story, and Midra, a lot of justice for his theme to be carried by his own followers, much like how he was before his torture. I think it's also interesting to note that there are no traces of Nanaya in this portion. It is strictly the followers' choir leading the main melody, and the solo violin or feminine choir doesn't come in until after it is finished.
Yeah, so this is the part I wanted to show. Amazing melody and the harmony. amazing melody, but also listen to this harmony. The harmony is almost entirely made of disturbing chords. Wow. Like FromSoft is known to use these chords, right? These very, very disturbing chords. They do it all the time. I don't think I've ever seen a song with so many of them though. Now, among all these disturbing evil chords, all of a sudden they do this. A kind of glorious, positive, happy chord in the midst of all these disturbing chords. Man, there's a really intriguing character here. I feel like there's a very well-defined story or very well-defined character being portrayed here. There is a sense of loneliness and tragedy. There is, of course, a little bit of chaos and evil and danger, a lot of disturbing chords, but every once in a while, this happens. Some sense of positivity, some sense of majesty and hope and glory. What does that mean?
This bridge is once again led by the choir of Midra's followers, but now highlighted by Nanaya's feminine vocalist. The choir and strings perform a descending scale once again, showcasing the fall of Midra. These scales are also done in chromatic mode, something which I don't have the time to properly explain, but basically, composers use notes that sound similar to one another in what is called a key. Chromatic mode throws all that music theory bullshit out the window, and the composers just use whatever notes they want, regardless of the key.
Oh, and I'm gonna show you the descents. Remember the descents I told you about? That sense of release, of falling down, of desperation, tragedy.
Think of it as a composer going Super Saiyan. The chromatic descent shows just how far they are willing to go to highlight the fall of Midra, and it ends up sounding more like a tragic descent into hell told by those unfortunate enough to remain on Earth. For the final climax of the track, we return to a 5-beat measure, and a new melody, reminiscent of the first chorus. The choir are now seemingly more front and center than before, singing along with the solo violin, which, if you'll remember, accented Nanaya and Midra's duet at the beginning, though this time Midra is not present in the song. It's as if everyone around him is coming together to reminisce about the man they once knew in one final bout as the world falls apart around them. The frantic violins behind the chorus paint a new picture for me, however. The solidity of the face of this track, accentuated by the chaos brimming in the background, is reflective of Midra, I think. His graceful bravado throughout the boss fight and control over the frenzied flame is reflective in the music as this perfect, strong shell holding back a maelstrom of madness, and I think that's pretty damn cool. With a final return to a 3-beat measure, the song ends in this upbeat chant, still with a twinge of chaos as the vocalists and string literally wind down as the song concludes. As the instruments quiet down, the song ends on a completely uncharacteristic, peaceful, and subdued vocalist, almost as if Midra's followers have just learned of his fate to the tarnished and hang their head in sorrow for their once glorious and revered friend. And as that final voice fades away, Midra, the lord of frenzied flame, is extinguished. No fanfare, no final epic words, just kneeling and accepting his fate, and the mercy you brought in killing him. It's a beautiful ending to a masterful track, and my personal favorite story and character in Elden Ring.
Wow, first video, huh? Jesus Christ. It took forever. 50 minutes? 45 minutes? I never would have expected it. It's been a hell of a process, and I really appreciate you if you stayed by this entire time and got to this point. I hope my analysis wasn't too shit or too out there or anything. I just, I don't know. I found a real passion for this, and I figured, fuck it. I don't see anybody else making this kind of stuff, so I'll do it myself. So I just wanted to express my my thanks and my gratitude to anybody who sat through this video. Yeah, if you want to help out the channel, you know what to do. Everything's free, and it would mean the world to me. I mean, I don't really have anything else to say. I mean, fuck, I'm just glad it's over. And hopefully I'll pump out another one soon. So yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. I appreciate you getting to this point, staying through, sticking with me. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Hey, one last thing. If you like the video so much that you like me now, peep me over on Twitch, ZFeet. I'm streaming when I'm not slaving away on these videos. I'm streaming just about every weekday. We do all kinds of shit. We got a big ass list of games that we're going through. So yeah, if you want to come over, hang out, listen to some music, play some fun games, yeah, I'll see you there, hopefully. Yeah, that's about it. Peace.